Hi, Faith.
Hey,
Faith.
Hey.
how you doing? I recognize faces and names, and let me put on my glasses. Okay, now wait a minute. Who is iPhone? I don't know. All right, is that Stephen White over there?
I'm Steven, yep.
Okay, I thought so. All right, I've got one person with reddish hair and wearing a green top.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
You're listed as iPhone. And don't ask me how to change it. I don't know.
I do.
Is that me, Susan? Maybe that's me. I just used my iPhone. I'm not familiar with Zoom.
All right, so let's see here. I want to see everybody. There we go. Okay. All right, so hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi. Hi, AJ.
We have a couple people that I'm not seeing. We have a Letitia, maybe? Yeah. And a Lisa and a Carol and a Con or Sasha and a Lynn and a Heather. So if y'all want to join with your video, there's a little, if you're on your computer, if you hover across the bottom, there's a band at the bottom and it'll say video. Join with the video.
Don't see that.
You don't see that? All right. Joshua,
It may say start video or stop video. You may also need to mess with your video settings to get it to select the correct camera.
Unable to detect. It's unable to detect my camera for some reason.
So yeah, what you would need to do is go to video settings, and you'll see if your camera is currently active, you'll see your face there. And then you'll go to camera right beneath that. If it's, let me see here.
See video settings. Do I need to go to my control panel?
No, you shouldn't need to do that. On Zoom, you should see at the bottom where it's next to where the mute button is for the microphone.
All right. I see start video, and then it says it's unable to detect my camera, but I definitely have one.
Okay, so right next to the stop video, there's a small arrow. If you click on that.
I don't see that small arrow. I see mute, test microphone, switch to audio, Zoom is unable to detect my camera. Huh.
Let me see.
I've got an MSI gaming computer. It certainly should recognize the camera.
Yeah, you should see the option for the little arrow. I'm not sure why you're not seeing it. Does everybody else see an arrow next to their start or stop video?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Shoot.
We might not be able to see everybody, but at least can everybody hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
I see people nodding. Okay, Amelia, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, Carol, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, Lynn, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, and is it Latasha or Letitia? Can you hear us?
Their microphone is off.
Yeah, they're currently muted.
You're muted.
Yep, I see that. Let's see. So maybe not. All right.
I think I hit record and it asked for permission. I didn't mean to hit that.
That's okay. I have the recording going on my end.
I was clicking something else and my mouse shifted. So.
There are also people weighing in, at least one person on chat at the bottom.
Ah, okay. And Melody says she's at work with no video, but she's here. She can hear it. So we're good. All right. Hi, everybody. This is
Hi.
Hi, Faith.
a great crowd. I'm so impressed. I didn't know at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't know if it would be better or worse, but it's about the same as when we do it at 6 o'clock, except I don't think we have as many UK people or as many, probably nobody over in the Hawaii or Alaska area. Looks like close by, we've got a good set of numbers. Everybody wants to see everybody's picture. You can hover across the top banner and you'll see something that looks like a tic-tac-toe board. You can click on that and it'll line your pictures up. Very cool. Okay, so what we're going to do is taking place. So Joshua,
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone except for Faith and AJ real quick.
So there's a total Lord.
and all right, AJ's muted. So we got to, there we go. All right, so how's the feedback now? Thumbs up? Okay, excellent. So glad you all came. This is neat. AJ and I have been sort of forth about what we would talk about, and since I don't know how many of you are familiar, AJ, you get to do like this whole major intro of all of your books. Yeah, I know, big surprise, and a little bit about you.
Okay.
And the fact that AJ's a New York Times best-selling author, and he writes everything. I mean, he doesn't just do like me, like for mystery and women's fiction and the sci-fi and the fantasy. AJ's done everything except.
I do everything. The Bible, that was me. Yeah, one of my better known things.
Okay, be more specific. I said
Okay.
it's supposed to be fun and low key, but you got to tell us stuff.
Okay, so yeah, my name's AJ Hartley. I am a Brit by birth. I've lived in a lot of places. I've lived in the States now for 30 years. And I publish mystery, thriller, sci-fi, fantasy, some for kids, some for adults, some YA, which is probably what I'm going to be talking about mostly today. Yeah, I do. My first novel was a sort of archaeological mystery at the time when people were reading things like that in the sort of Dan Brown years. And then I did some fantasy novels, slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek, swords and sorcery kind of stuff. But then I've done a lot of other things. I write also with a guy called Tom DeLonge, who's the lead singer for Blink-182, if that means anything to anybody. And we do a sci-fi series called Secret Machines together. I'm also a Shakespeare professor, for what that's worth. And so, sometimes that finds its way into my fiction as well. And Faith and I have known each other for,
I don't know, 10,
15 years nearly.
Maybe 15, yeah.
Yeah, and we used to work together on magical words back in the early 14th century.
Magical Words was a writer's help that we would give advice and do posts, and there were, let's see, it was you, Misty Massey, David Coe, was Edmund, he was an early.
Initially, I mean, when I was first working with you, it was just us.
That's right. And we brought in other people.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anyway, okay. I think my life is longer and longer and longer, and I forget more and more every day. So, okay. Tell me about when you first started writing, and when and how that came about, and how I know that we have a sort of a similar story for our first books. My first book is Gwen, and your first big book. And in my case, they told me to quit my job. What did they say?
They said, whatever you do, don't quit your job.
I lost that. Say it again.
I said, whatever they said, whatever you do, don't quit your job. It was a weird thing. I mean, I wrote my first novel when I was 19. And it was a murder mystery kind of thing, because I'd been reading a lot of those. And I couldn't sell it. And I wrote for 20 years before I published. And this was before self-publishing, you know, because as we have already established, this was a long time ago when all books were handwritten with little illustrations in the corner by monks. So I did a lot of those. But yeah, I wrote for 20 years. I wrote 8, I think, complete novels before I was published. And the one that finally came out was something called The Mask of Atreus, and it was this murder mystery thriller thing. But even that was weird. You know, my agent called me and she said, and I could tell immediately from her voice that something really cool and weird had happened. And the cool part was that we'd sold my first book, finally. Not the first book I wrote, of course, the one I'd just written.
Right.
But what was weird about it was that we had sold it in Greece.
Greece before you sold it in the Americas.
Yeah, which never happens, right?
No, it happened to me. That's what's so weird. I'm perplexed, but go ahead.
Yeah, so we sold it in Greece, and then it sold in Indonesia. And in, you know, I think one day we're going to discover as yet unknown tribes in the Amazon basin, and they'll have copies of my first novel printed in whatever bizarre language they happen to speak. So yeah, it was really strange, and it sort of spread that way before I got a US publisher. And so yeah, it came out, and everything since then has been absolutely fantastic.
It did what fantastic? You cut out.
Everything. My entire life, my publishing career has been nothing but brilliant success ever since. And obviously this is a lie.
I'm wondering, did you start martinis early today, or?
No, but I'm thinking Tea with Faith might be better as Johnny Walker with Faith at this point. There's room for one more. So yeah, I mean, I wrote mystery thriller for a while, and then, you know, nobody was reading them, including the tribes in the Congo Basin or wherever it was. And so I sort of moved sideways into other things, and, you know, I've always read lots of different kind of books, so I write lots of different kind of books, much to my agent's frustration.
So your agent finds it difficult to do that, to sell books, because you're not pigeonholed. Well,
I mean, I think she thinks, rightly, I'm sure, that I would sell better if I had a brand, right?
So if you just wrote one thing and were branded that way.
Yeah. People keep saying.
Which is why I write under multiple names.
Sorry?
Which is why I write under multiple names, because it says that would work better.
Yeah. And I probably should have done that too, but I don't care enough, I guess. So
well, when I was first published, I sold to Holland first.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. And I did well in Holland.
Mm-hmm. I did really great in Holland.
Yeah.
Because my agent took it to, what's the German book fair?
Frankfurt.
Yeah. And sold everything there, sold France, Holland, and Germany there, and then refused to sell anything to anyone else until he put it up for auction in America. And that was my first big book as Gwen. So And at a time when people were writing very different things from what they're writing now.
Yeah.
So, all right. So right now, let's see. Someone asked a question. Did you need to translate to Greek and Basha?
No, fortunately, we have no involvement in the translations, so it's interesting because I'm kind of fascinated to know what my books read like in other languages, but I have no idea. And unless I learn those languages, I'm never going to know. We don't even get consulted most of the time. Once in a blue moon, you'll get a query from a translator, but usually we don't even get that.
Yeah, they just figure out what they want to say and how to make it work.
Yeah.
Whether they understand it or not.
Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't be at all surprised if somebody, explained one of my books to me that they'd read in another language and it's like a totally different book, different ending. It's like, I love that part when the cow exploded. And you're like, what?
I love that. Well, all right. So we had a couple of other questions. Right now you are, well, before we get to our individual books, I want to know how your writing process normally works versus how it worked on this last book, because we're really here to talk about Impervious, but for you, Impervious was a different ballgame from
it was.
You had done before. And I understand the way, I have worked in a lot of different methods as my health has made a difference and as I've not worked at the hospital or worked more at the hospital. So everything changes, but it still all remains the same in the sense that I normally outline and I normally, my methodology is the same, even if I can't write in the mornings some days and I have to write in the afternoons or I skip a week, but it's still, my brain still works the same way.
Yeah.
In terms of organization. But I think you were saying earlier that with Impervious, this was different. So how do you normally work? And then what changed with this one?
I think, the way that I have written, as you say, has sort of changed over the years and it varies a little by project, but generally speaking, I discovered that one of the things that didn't work for me very well was just making stuff up, just sitting down and once upon a time there was a man and he had an exploding cow. I don't know where and just sort of making the story as you go along, and frequently I would get to a point where I'm like, wait, now this, and I've been working on the book for months and months and months, but I've kind of lost interest in where it began, and now it's turned into something else, and suddenly there are cowboys and UFOs and velociraptors and apparently exploding cows, and then I would try to sell it, and the agent was like, yeah, not really sure what this is, and I'm like. So I learned the hard way that I needed to sort of plan the stories out and do a certain amount of structuring in advance, if only to keep myself on track.
So you started out a complete pantser?
I was at first.
By the seat of your pants, for those who don't know.
Yeah, I was a complete I was a teenage pantser. Yes. Now it can be told. So, and then, and it just didn't work for me, really, I think. So I forced myself to start outlining and planning. And usually the outlines weren't like extensive. They weren't like a Jeff Deaver outline, which is 200 pages long for a 400-page novel. I couldn't do that. I don't have the patience. But I would write, a 10, 15-page outline that would map out the story and the big moments and still give me enough flexibility for it to feel fresh and exciting and interesting to write, because I like the actual writing process,
Yeah.
And I want to sort of make some discoveries along the way. So that kind of flexible-ish model, and I would spend some time working on that and then live with it for a little while, sit on it and make sure the story seemed to be shaping up the way I wanted it to. And then I would take 3 months or so to do a first draft, and then another month or so to do my first edit, and so on. So the whole process would take 6 months or so. Actually, initially it would take longer. It's got faster as I've gone along. So yeah, so it was a fairly sort of deliberate, painstaking kind of process, usually, you know, but not so much with this new one.
Well, all right. So what was different with the new one?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too depressing, but I was in a school shooting, and I was on campus with my students a year ago, and in a building, you know, a couple of 100 yards away from where we were, somebody came in shooting, and we didn't know what was going on, and we had to sort of go into an emergency lockdown and wait for a couple of hours until the sort of police SWAT teams came and cleared the building. And it was sort of a traumatic experience, you know. I mean, I wasn't hurt. I didn't get shot. Other people did. So I then had to sort of figure out what I was going to do with this. And for the first day or so, it was okay. You know, I was quite sort of calm, but I hate to talk about it as something like PTSD, but that's kind of what it was, you know. And I suddenly realized that I had this story that I wanted to tell, and it was going to be a fantasy novel, but it was growing out of this experience, and I wrote it in 13 days without an outline. And in those 13 days, I didn't do anything else. I just sort of ate and slept and wrote.
And you did shower, right?
Maybe occasionally. Yeah, you know, when the fog got too bad. So yeah, so this was a very different experience. So I wrote it in 13 days, and then put it aside for a couple of days, and spent another week or so just sort of going over it and making sure there weren't huge holes in it. And then started sharing it with other people, yourself included. And then it didn't really get edited again until it was coming due for publication, you know, and then it was mostly small stuff. So a very different kind of process than I usually have, yeah.
Did you send it to your agent? Did you go through the same selling process?
Yep, I did.
You want to talk about that or not?
Well, I mean, it's an odd thing because, you know, as a culture, we don't seem to know how to talk about gun violence, particularly in ways that aren't divisive or incendiary or and I think that, you know, the big New York houses say, well, you know, if this is going to be a school shooting book, it should be like this. It should be a certain kind of book. It should be an issue book. And what they weren't ready for was this sort of Buffy the Vampire Slayer style fantasy adventure that had this sort of realist underpinning to it. So I think people were largely sort of, I don't know, scared of it, baffled by it. I'm not sure. But it was very odd because we didn't get the usual responses, and people just didn't seem to want to talk about it at all. So in the end, I went with the small press, as you know, and in the interest of getting it out quickly. And so it's out.
And it's wonderful.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
I'm adorable. You see him laugh, right? Yeah, you controlled that really well. I'm impressed.
Mm-hmm.
When you, I know that when you write a book that's cathartic like that, because I've done that. It took me way longer than 13 days. It took me 3 months to write Betrayal. So I know what it does to you. I know how you get sucked in and consumed by the story. I understand how that works. Although my book was the other way around and my character actually did the shooting, but whole different storyline. But how did your family react while you were in those 13 days? I mean, I know what Rod did. When I was writing Betrayal, he just stayed away from me. Was it the same?
Yeah, it really was. It was. I mean, I think they could tell that there was something that I needed to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I said, I was talking about this in another format somewhere else recently, and the way it came, because I'm a theater professor, and the event itself that I was there for was a theater event, and we finished up taking shelter in a dressing room. So it was me and like 5 students who were hiding there for 2 hours. And the way it started to feel later during the writing process, and I don't think I knew this at the time, but it was the only way I was ever going to get out of that dressing room. You
were still trapped in it.
Yeah. And some of the time I'd be fine. And then some of the time I'd be like at a grocery store and I would have this sort of panic attack, where I felt like in immediate danger. So this was a way to try and find a way out of that situation. Yeah. And my family instinctively recognized that and gave me the space to just do it. And like you, it's not unusual for me. When major things happen in my life, they finish up in my books. So don't piss me off.
I've already done that so many times and you haven't kept up. Well, actually, maybe you have. I don't know. I never asked. What's the difference for you? Because I don't write YA. I don't have the voice for it. My characters, the one time I tried it, my agent wrote back and said, she sounds like she's 35. So how do you,
well,
what's different about?
When was it that you tried that?
I was about 45.
I mean, I think, YA as a market has changed a lot and become a lot more flexible. And of course, a lot of the readership of YA is not actually YA, right?
It's adults. Yeah, a lot of it. In fact, maybe more than half.
Yeah, I would say so. So I think that as the market has fragmented and become a lot more niche driven, the idea of writing what is technically YA but is being read by older people, I think is not necessarily a bad thing. But for me, I mean, the key difference is the age of the protagonist, right?
Right.
And beyond that, almost anything goes. What makes it work, I think, and why I think adults sometimes gravitate towards young adult, is that there's an intensity to the YA experience. Because if you think back, it was when you're 14, 15, 16, whatever, these are the first times that you experience a lot of things.
Right.
Your first love, your first sense of betrayal, and everything feels enormous. So there's a tremendous kind of emotional availability and a sense of drama, which I think is very appealing to those of us who are older, because life gets complicated and muddy and flat. And it's easy to sort of slide into a rut of some sort. You know, so the appeal of our own adolescence, I think, is quite compelling. Sorry, I'm hearing weird noises. Is that me, or is that...
No, that's my husband opening the garage door. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's over now. He's downstairs, and I didn't realize that it would pick up, or I would have muted it. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So, I mean, yeah, I think the key thing for YA is the age of the protagonist. Beyond that, almost anything you can do in adult, you can do in YA. It may limit some of the publishers who will handle the book. You know, if you write a YA book with a lot of sex and violence in it, it's not going to be picked up by Scholastic. Right?
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But there is a market for it. You know, there are other, and incidentally, I don't write books with a lot of sex and violence. Just for the record.
I write with a lot of violence, but no sex. Which tells people far too much about me.
I think it's called sublimating, but okay.
Okay, so we have a question here. For someone who's never read your work, what book should they read first?
Well, I will always start with the Bible, obviously.
Okay, we know you think you're God. We do know this. Those who love you know that's your belief, but start with something a little less.
Honestly, I think it depends what you like, because my stuff really is all over the place. You know, some of it is sort of light comic fantasy. Some of it is dark mystery with no paranormal element at all. You know, absolutely realist. I do, you know, I write as AJ Hartley and Andrew Hart, and the Andrew Hart books are completely realist domestic thriller, you know, and the AJ Hartley stuff is less easy to clarify. But, you know, you can always look at my website, which is ajhartley.net, and you'll see everything there. And I would say it's not like, oh, you need to start here in order to see what I'm doing. It's more a question of what appeals to you and your reading habits. You know, I have a real soft spot for a series that I wrote a few years ago called Steeplejack, which are technically young adult, but I don't think really read like young adult. The character is 17, and the stories are set in a world that looks like Victorian South Africa. But they are sort of, it's kind of alternate history, kind of fantasy, and kind of mystery thriller as well. It's sort of everything going on at the same time.
And they're fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Steeplejack is the first one, right?
Steeplejack is the first one, yeah.
Yeah, and it was absolutely spectacular. So if I were going to recommend, I would say either Impervious or Steeplejack.
Okay.
That would be my way to introduce your work, and then people could filter through the other things that that you've written. We have Michelle Drew. Will you wave? AJ wants to know, her question for you is, who has the rights in the UK? She works at Waterstones.
The rights to what?
To Impervious.
To Impervious, UCLan. And the book comes out July 2nd. The cover is completely different. And we're in the process of nailing down an audio book now, but it's not contracted yet. But yeah, UCLan also did the Darwin Arkwright middle grade series that they have repackaged as Monsters in the Mirror for the UK.
Is that the Darwin Arkwright? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Those are fun. I see Michelle nodding. Yeah, she knows about that one. Okay. Someone wants to know, for both of us, which of your characters is most like you?
This can only go badly.
Good. Let's go badly.
You know, I did a fantasy series that you know, Faith, called, the first one is called Act of Will, and the second one is called Willpower, and they're sort of medieval Renaissance-y kind of setting. And the lead character is an actor, sort of smart ass.
Go ahead, say.
And it's a fan, and he doesn't believe in magic, and he doesn't believe in heroism, he doesn't believe in all the things that are central to fantasy, right? Nobility and all that sort of stuff. He doesn't believe in any of that. And then he gets sort of caught up in this implausible set of events in which he has to sort of figure out, what's real and what isn't. And a lot of his sort of smart alecky, perpetual adolescent brand of humor and self-deprecation is me.
I have often accused you of being 12 years old.
This is true.
This is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I guess it's a combination. It would be a combination of Molly Everhart and her daughter Angie Baby. Because she mothers everybody and she fights the battles she can and she puts her family first and nothing else matters but them. And Angie Baby, because she's always jumping into hot water before she looks, before she sticks a toe in, before she thinks, and is very apt to say things she probably shouldn't because she's a child at heart. So 12 years old here too. Truly, in a lot of ways.
I think the impulse to be a storyteller is that, right? And I think that speaks also to the question before about writing YA. I think one of the things that you need to write YA or middle grade is a connection with your own childhood, right?
Yeah.
A memory of what it's like to be in that situation, and like if you're like me, an inability to actually ever get out of it.
But that's a good thing.
Okay. Tell me.
Staying young is difficult.
Mm.
Because you could so easily let yourself get dragged down by life. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. Although sometimes you do need the back of your head smacked. I can think of two notable things right now, but we will not discuss with them. Okay, so we have other questions. Okay, from Wylin, she says she's going to check out Steeplejack. She just read a review on Goodreads. Excellent. And then Steven says we happen to adore Molly and Angie Baby, so that's perfect. Though I feel like there's a little of Leo in there in me too. Playing the long game, check. Slightly evil, check. Still lovable, check. Super fun, check. Okay, thank you. I am also Leo. I don't deny it. She's been back there just laughing. Go ahead. I missed that.
And Beast.
And yes, I do like extraordinarily rare steak. Not still kicking, but close. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else here that's on this side. Oh, this was a good one. A really brilliant guy came up with this question. He said, let's talk about the way fantasy and reality intersect generally, and why is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah. I was raised on the kind of fantasy that feels like a real step away from reality, in Tolkien and such like that. But I think as I got older, much as I still love Tolkien, I found ways to connect it more to real life. And I often find that the fantasy that I'm most interested in is the kind of fantasy that, instead of being simply an escape from reality, is kind of a way of looking at reality through a distorting lens, or like a kaleidoscope or a telescope or something. You're looking at something, but somehow it reshapes that reality along different lines. And I've always preferred that And I find it easier to invest in characters and their issues and problems and conflicts if I can sort of see an analogy to actual issues and problems and conflicts that I might encounter in the quote unquote real world, whatever that might be. So, you know, the Steeplejack books are a case in point. You know, these are, it's sort of alternative history, as I said, and it's fantasy, but it's also very clearly books written about contemporary race relations in modern America. You know, and occasionally, you know, if you look at my Amazon reviews for Steeplejack, I will occasionally get slapped by people who say there's no place for politics in fantasy. I'm not interested in talking about the difficulties of the real world if I'm reading a fantasy novel. That's what I go to fantasy for, to get away from that stuff. That's fair enough, I guess, but then you shouldn't be reading me.
Well, I don't think they should be reading anyone, because our whole, really and truly, everything we write has political overtones. It has current event overtones. When I wrote Betrayal, it was one solid self-discovery current event that everyone was suddenly talking about, and it burst open the world. It was a part of it was a very, very early part of the Me Too world. And it led, I mean, I can see how those years, the early 90s, affected everything we read today. And there was nothing political in it, but it was all about life, and life and politics always intersect. And if they don't, then we're not doing our politics right.
Right, and I don't mean, by politics, I don't mean like party politics and this is who you're supposed to be voting for and that kind of, I don't mean that. I mean the sort of ordinary socioeconomic, you know, identity and economic and the ordinary stuff that shapes who has power and who doesn't. You know, the way that we navigate those things and the issues that come up along the way. That's what I mean.
Totally. That's what I knew you meant. Okay, we have we need a name drop. The fabulous Christopher Eccleston narrates a certain audiobook. Would you talk about that one right quick?
Sure, yeah. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a novel called Cold Bath Street, which is a ghost story. Again, technically YA, but I don't think it feels YA. And it's set in the late 70s in Lancashire, in northern England, where I grew up. And it's a story about, you know, that grew out of the local ghost stories and legends that I grew up with. Because I'd been working on the Steeplejack series and other books in which I was very different from the protagonist, right? And so it was an effort of imagining and empathy, right? Of thinking myself into people who were very not like me in order to figure out how the story would work. And then running a lot of stuff by other people, you know, and saying, okay, I am not a brown person. Read this and tell me when I'm getting it wrong. Help me, you know? And so a part of me wanted to, after coming out of that experience, which was great, but I thought, if I'm going to write another YA type book, I want to write it completely out of my own experience, which meant not just setting it in the present day, because I have a teenage son, but his version of adolescence is very different from what mine was. So I thought, I'm going to write it in the past. So I set it in 1978 when I was 15, 16, yeah. So and so it's saturated in the culture and the music and everything of that period, but it's also very British and specifically Lancashire, northwest, working class, industrial England, which is not the version of England that generally gets exported to the US, right? sometimes it feels like everybody in America thinks that all English people live either in palaces or thatched cottages, you know, and we didn't. So, you know, so it's a working class industrial Lancashire story. And I wanted a reader who would connect with that viscerally. So Chris Eccleston, who some of you will know as the 9th Doctor Who, does the audio. And Chris and I have met a number of times, and we are exactly the same age. And he came from Salford, and I'm from Preston, so about 20 miles apart, something like that. And we have a very similar sort of sensibility. And we've done a number of events together in the UK, and always get along. I actually had him, as I said before, I'm a Shakespeare professor, and I had him Skype into my class a few weeks ago to talk about playing Macbeth for the Royal Shakespeare Company, among other things. So we stay in touch, and he's the perfect reader for that book in terms of dialect and also just understanding what it was like to be, you know, by modern standards, poor in Britain. Yeah.
I'm going to take the last question that we have here. So we'll end the questions at this point. We have 2 more. I'm going to do the last one and then the next to the last one. So talk to me about choosing titles.
Yeah. Okay. And as you know, we don't always have complete control over this.
Because we're not independently published. We're not indies.
Yeah, we're not indies. So, you know, I'm trying to think. If I glance over my books, I would say I've probably come up with the titles of about 80%, though they weren't always the first titles. Sometimes I would have a title for a manuscript and the editor or the agent or whoever would say, what else you got? And then I would send them a list and we would sort of figure something out together. And sometimes it's not even that. You know, we talked about the Darwin Arkwright books. The first book in that series was originally called The Old Mirror Shop. And I sent it to Penguin, and they said, we love the book, we hate the title. And I was quite disappointed because I thought The Old Mirror Shop, it has this sort of Dickensian kind of faintly magical. Anyway, so they said, no, we're not calling it that. So I sent them a list, and this was during the editing process of the book, right? So this was going on. I would send them new titles, and they're like, yeah, no. So I'd send them more titles and more titles. And eventually they, you know, editor called me up and said, we've had a meeting.
That's always fun. That's a wonderful beginning to a conversation.
Yeah, we've had a meeting. Because I had sent them a list of like 25 titles. And they said the title of the book is Darwin Arkwright and the Peregrine Pact. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I don't even know what that is. And they're like, yeah, we've had a meeting. That's what it's called.
And you don't have a choice when that happens.
You don't have a choice, no.
Not if you're traditionally published through New York. You don't.
Which is part of the reason that now those books are coming out in the UK. They're coming out under a different name.
A much better name.
Monsters in the Mirror, I think, is a simpler, catchier kind of title. And, you know, the Darwin Arkwright and the Peregrine Pact, I'm like, how's anybody ever going to find that? They're not going to remember. Anyway. So, yeah. So the UK ones have a completely different look and different titles. And I think, you know, actually, I like them better.
All of my books have different titles in other countries, or the ones I wrote under Gwen. The ones I wrote as Faith, they're pretty much the same. But unlike you, I really totally suck at titles all the time. And I probably didn't come up with 15% of my titles. I didn't. Skinwalker I came up with. Mercy Blade I came up with. Nothing else.
Good.
Soon, nothing else in that whole series did I come up with.
Really?
I lied. Dark Queen. That's 3.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, But all of the others, I couldn't come up with a good title for it. Okay, so before we read, Joshua wants to know, what advice would you have for an aspiring writer who just can't seem to finish a story with or without an outline? So I'm going to say first, kill a character. Now, AJ's laughing because we've been on, we've been on panels, and that's always my answer. You just kill a character and it changes everything.
Yeah, it does change everything.
Don't kill the main character. Do what?
Kill your protagonist.
That's what I said. Don't kill that one.
Yeah. Page 4, and then she died. The end.
So much for the series.
Yeah, really.
But really where that comes from for me is if you're stuck, it's because everything is working out too well. Make things worse. Do the worst thing to your characters that you can possibly think of short of death. Make it worse. And that brings in our fight or flight part of our brain, that hind brain that goes, I will survive this. I will find a way through this. And your brain works differently when you're placed in danger. So I place my characters in much worse danger than they're already in. And that frees me. And sometimes it is killing a character, or almost killing a character. And that's why I'll post something, I killed 2 characters today. And then the next day I say, okay, I brought one of them back. Because I really needed that character off so that my brain would be freed. And then I can just X out that part of the story because I really didn't plan to use it. But I needed that freedom for my brain. What would you say?
It's your job. Finish the book. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I think I hear a lot people saying, I can't figure out how to end my story, and it's hard for me to grasp that because the ending is usually the thing that I know first.
Really?
I usually have a premise and sort of how the story is going to start and what I find interesting about it. And when I know what I find interesting about the story, I also know how it's going to finish.
Got it.
Pretty much. Now, with a mystery where there's going to be a lot of like clues and stuff that has, I'm not going to know any of that. And I might not know who the bad guy is.
That, yes. And I think that probably surprises people. But when I'm writing a mystery, I have no idea who the bad guy is.
Yeah. And then when you get to the end, you can then go back and make sure that everything works and fix it so that it's right. But I don't always know who the bad guy is because that's not really the point. If it's a mystery, the ending that I know in mind is that the protagonist is going to survive and he's going to solve the crime.
Yes.
Maybe as simple as that, but that's because it's built into the genre.
Yeah, there's a certain format in genre that you don't screw around with. If you're writing romance, the 2 main characters will get together. If you're writing a murder mystery, the protagonist lives and the antagonist goes to jail and the murder is solved. So there are certain things you don't leave out when you're writing genre writing.
Yeah.
But again, kill a character and see if it frees your brain up.
But I would say, and also it depends on whether we're talking about writing a short story or whether you're talking about writing a novel.
And that does make a difference.
If you're stuck with the ending of a short story, then put it aside and start something else. If you've already committed, you've already got like 50,000 words of a novel, finish it. But I think, sometimes what you need to do is take that 30,000 foot view and say, what kind of a story am I telling? How do I want this? Obviously, Faith, when you talk about it, you're very much in the perspective of the character.
Yeah.
I think is a really good thing. But I think another way to think of it is the character's not the only one on the journey. The reader is on the journey. Where do I want the reader's journey to conclude? What do I want them to get out of this experience? And where do I see, the end of this stage of the journey, you know, or the end of this actual journey.
And how do I want the reader to feel? That feeling is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, you know, I was talking before about the Steeplejack books, and since somebody's already said they're going to get one, I'll talk about that. You know, because I was working in a fairly sort of dystopian, racially complicated culture, I knew that my hero was not going to be able to fix the society that she lived in by the end of book one.
And none of us can.
Right, but that's the point, right? But I wanted there to be an arc in which whatever the immediate crisis or mystery was resolved, and that some of the and other little victories were achieved along the way, but the world wouldn't change. You know, not with a sort of broad brush, you know. Yeah.
Okay, and then one last question. No, Leo's buried. So, oh, my answer was very Leo. Yes, my answer was very Leo. But no, Leo's in a coffin, and I'm not sure what to do about that. My editor said, "You do know that all of your fans will hate you, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of, maybe, likely,
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was on Facebook earlier, and are you friends with David Morrell?
I am not.
Okay, so anyway, David Morrell wrote. He posted something today to say today is the anniversary of the second Rambo movie, which he wrote the novel for, and I was like, but you also wrote the first novel, the first Rambo novel, First Blood, at the end of which the character died. So how do you then go back and write a sequel to the novel in which you killed the character?
What did he say?
Well, it's not because the movie decided to keep the Rambo character alive.
Okay.
So the second novel was written almost really as a movie tie-in, a spin-off. It wasn't a novel he conceived of. It was based on somebody else's screenplay.
Very good. Okay.
But we never know where these things are going to end, and dead people come back to life.
Okay, and it's 3:00 nearly, and there's a very big storm heading our way, someone says, AJ. I don't see that outside, but maybe I'm assuming that's our area. Barbara, is that the Charlotte area?
I live in the Greenville area, and it came through, knocked out my power, knocked me off this for a little while. And I looked, it's headed straight for Rock Hill. I don't know if it's going to hit Charlotte or not.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and AJ, if you want to read from something, and then when we finish, I'm going to read from a short story that introduces Aya.
How much should I read? How are we for time?
Well, I thought we'd be finished about 3:15. That would give us really an hour of active participation. So we've got 15 minutes. Read 7 or 8 minutes.
7 or 8 minutes. What's that in old money?
Well, it depends on how, I can't tell you how many words to read because I don't know how fast you're going to read.
Okay, then I'll do the short version. Okay, so this is from Impervious. This here. Nothing much has happened. I mean, actually things have happened, but we don't really know what has happened yet. But the character is called Trina. She's a high school student, and she is at home, and she has just received an anonymous gift of a necklace with a sword pendant on it. Trina took her backpack with her to the diner, the little jewelry box safely zipped into one of its many compartments. She was still puzzled by the anonymous gift and its equally enigmatic message. "You will understand," it said. But she didn't. She wasn't sure that the sword charm was exactly the same as the one in the video game, because the Destiny Blade was what you got at the end. You only used it to kill the big bad in the final combat sequence. And though she played the game all the time, she'd only actually played through to the end once. Normally, she just used the open play function, doing side quests, collecting gear and pets. She joined online adventure parties from time to time, but Phantasm 3 was largely her thing, a private retreat from work, school, and family. She didn't even share it with Jasmine, who was, at best, an occasional gamer. Most of the gamer guys at school were into sports and first-person shooters. All of that left her with no idea as to who might have sent her the necklace, which was just a tiny bit creepy. That was the real reason she hadn't put it on. Still, it was a pretty thing, she thought, as she considered it again in Jimmy's kitchen before putting on her apron and name badge. She lifted it up to her face to study the detailing of the sword, and it turned as it hung, sparkling, mesmerizing. "Don't be all day," said Jimmy, coming in from the dining room. For a big man, he was surprisingly light on his feet and had a bad habit of showing up when you weren't expecting him. "If you're going to go to work, get on with it. Try not to bust anything." Trina tightened her hand around the necklace so he couldn't see it, as if his gaze would tarnish it somehow. But as soon as he bustled off, muttering to himself, she looped the chain over her head, checked the clasp, and let it drop around her neck. She eyed her distorted reflection in the glossy tile around the sink, adjusting the little sword so that it hung down between her throat and the soft cleft of her breasts. She wished she had a mirror. When she thought it looked right, she smiled satisfied and let go. As soon as her fingers left the minuscule sword, something happened. The kitchen around her, with its cooktop grills, ovens, and walk-in refrigerator, seemed to sharpen, its white and steel surfaces brighter, its details more precise. It was like someone with poor vision putting on glasses for the first time, and for a moment she wavered, as if dizzy. But she wasn't dizzy. Quite the contrary. She felt like she had, in that very second, recovered her balance, found her stability, her focus. She blinked, then pivoted slowly, conscious that her awareness of her surroundings was strangely heightened. There was a new precision to the way the familiar kitchen laid out around her, as if her brain, or her gut, because it felt less like analysis and more like instinct, was assessing the structural blueprints of the place, each finely marked with measurements of length and depth and height. She spread her arms and rotated, first slow, then fast. On any other day, she wouldn't have dared to do such a thing, since she was risking stumbling, blundering into a stack of crockery, or sending a tower of glassware scattering in a cascade of noise and crystalline shards. Not today. Not in this one moment. She felt secure, composed, precise. She stopped the movement with the same unlikely grace with which she had begun it, and stood marveling at herself in the steel of the refrigerator door. In that instant, she knew that it wasn't only her spatial awareness that seemed more acute than usual. Her nose was suddenly alive to the aromas of food and metal, detergent, and something slightly foul and rotten beneath it. The garbage cans, she thought, turning to them, and something else, vinegar and ammonia. She inhaled, rotating on the spot, eyes closing, till she faced the corner and tipped her head down. Yes, she opened her eyes again. There were two black balls, no larger than pinheads, against the baseboard by the door. Mouse droppings. She stared, caught between a range of conflicting emotions, joy and revulsion, surprise and its opposite, as if she had somehow always known this day would come. The dull drone of conversation from the next room had sharpened too. She could hear Jimmy flirting with Mrs. Armstead, the sound of cutlery being set down on tabletops, and the creak of that one chair in the booth by the window. She heard someone laugh, and then footsteps. Jimmy was coming back. He pushed the door open roughly and glared at her. "I thought I told you to get a move on," he said. If I'm out there taking orders, I can't be back here cooking, can I? I'm ready now, said Trina, calm, collected, unusually so. Jimmy hesitated. He scowled and tried again. You changed your hair or something? You look different. It wasn't a compliment or a criticism, and he didn't seem to know what to make of this statement himself. He gave her a cautious, appraising look that was almost suspicious. You need to get the exterminator in, she said, walking past him with such poise and determination that he shrunk out of her way. Those traps you put out aren't working. Trina strode toward the dining room, sliding her notepad and pencil out of her apron pocket as she did so. But his awkward movement as she went by clipped a stack of plates fresh from the dishwasher. She heard them begin to slide, almost feel the microscopic adjustment of their glazed surfaces as the power shifted. She felt the movement on the counter, from the tiled floor and up through her shoes, like electricity shooting through her synapses. She spun deftly on the spot, shot out her right hand, and steadied the stack before it could fall. Jimmy looked at her stupidly, his mouth open, saying nothing. End of chapter.
Look at all the clap. Woo!
Yay.
Okay, so for the people who joined, you get an announcement. I have sold another compilation of all of the collected short stories except the Monster Hunter Inc. one, Monster Hunter Files. Well, that short story will not be included. But all of the short stories that are not currently available are going to be made available probably by the end of this year, including a brand new one that I wrote while I was in Ireland, which is totally outside of anything any world I've ever written in before, sort of, maybe. That will be up to how y'all interpret it. But this one will be included in it. So this is the introduction to Aya. It's set in 1860, and that happens to be the name of it, 1860. The Unega with the hairy face was feeding dry Palo Verde sticks to the fire. The snap and spit of fresh wood was lost to the distance, but the smoke rose and carried on the scant breeze, smelling hot and tangy to Aya's cat nose. The cowboys he had been following had stopped early for the night, making camp at a watering hole to rest the horses and let the cattle drink and graze. The watering hole and the small creek that carried the spring water into the desert were muddy now with the deep prints of cattle and filthy with cow and horse droppings and man piss. Ama, the water, was no longer drinkable. Unega always ruined Ama. It was part of what they were. Like a wolf howled and bison grazed, white man ruined water, always. Lisi, his grandmother, told him, never live downstream of a Unega. You will drink their shit. And the old woman had laughed. He wondered if Lisi still laughed today. He hadn't seen her since the dream sent him into the sunset to find the wildfire wind he saw in his visions. His stomach cramped with hunger, and he pressed down on it with his mind. His people were accustomed to hunger. They did not allow it to rule them, no matter how strong it became. He pressed his paws into the stone ledge, and his claws came out, white and pointed and sharper than the claws of the panther that his father had most often shifted into. Jaguar claws were better for what he had planned this night. Jaguar speed and strength, jaguar jaws and killing teeth, jaguar scent that the horses and cattle would recognize and fear. Jaguar that was stronger in every way than the puma of his father's clan. That panther that had failed his father at the last and allowed him to die. Down below, the small fire had caught, the flames in a tight blaze in a ring of rocks. The white men were making biscuits in a tin pan and heating beans that smelled sour. White men ate bad food and were often sick. It was beyond his understanding how a people who were so stupid had lived so long and conquered his own people, the Salaki, the Cherokee. Nisi said it was because his own people had been unwise and let them share the land. If his ancestors had simply killed them all, their lives would have been much better today. and they would still have their tribal lands in the Green Mountains. The black cowboys, Givnagay, took care of the horses and piled the saddles around the fire. They put the horses' legs into twisted rope hobbles so that they could graze without getting away. This would make his job much easier. He chuffed with pleasure, the sound too soft to carry. His scent was downwind of them, and the grazing prey did not know they were stalked. The day darkened, and the cattle lowed, the sound plaintive and lonely. The sunset was a red smear on the western sky. The scarlet light was hard to see in his cat form. It was much easier to see greens and blues and the silver of gray, but he knew it was there. The western sky was always bloody here in the barren hills of the place Unega called Arizona. He had been following the cowboys and their cattle for 7 days now, and they were far enough into the desert to be at a good place for his ambush. They set a watch and give Nagay on a hillock, but he was young and never looked into the hills around him. This was stupid, as Apache were known to raid here, Apache and Ayetas. The men below him laughed and talked, the strange sounds carried on the nearby still air. Black men and white men in 2 small groups, working the cattle, but not working together, divided by tribe and skin color and Unega folk superiority. Lisi had said the white man would eventually stumble and fall in his pride, but Ayetas had not seen signs of that at all. He believed her when he was a child, but his Lisi had gotten foolish in her old age. Back then, when he was a boy living with her, he had been called Nayev Dale Tiv Dotsi, or as the white man would say, Nantahala Panther. But the Nantahala River was a thing of memory lost to his people since the Unega sent him from their tribal lands in the territory. I'm going to skip on down just a little bit. The wind picked up the tingle of magic brushing along his spotted pelt. He chuffed, his whiskers moving as he scented the magic in the air, his ear tabs flitting. The woman was right on time. That was another thing he had found. The white woman with hair the color of the sunset. She called herself Everheart, which he had translated into Forever Heart. Or perhaps she had meant Forever Dear, which would be different, but sounded stupid. Deer were prey. The woman was not. The woman had magic, though different from his, and different from the magic of the shaman of his clan. She called herself a witch. She did things she called workings, and she was his. His Lisi would have wanted him to find a girl of the Saragi, but he had his forever woman. This was much better. As the magics grew, the wind picked up and whirled, making the leaves of the tree whisper, making the white men's fire dance. On the hillside, Givnyage's lookout stood up and stared over the open space. His eyes tracked the wind moving back and forth, as if he too felt the magic. But Ayetas knew that humans could not feel the magic of his forever woman, and that no men of her tribe had magic. He shielded his eyes from the last of the dying sunlight and focused in on the ledge where Ayetas lay. So perhaps Aya was wrong. This man might have different, dangerous magic. The wind shifted and the smoke whirled and swept into the cowboy's eyes. Sparks flew and swirled among the leaves in the tree. It was drought season, and any small sparks were a danger. He saw the tree catch fire even from so far away. He could hear the whoosh as it caught and blazed. The men screamed and began to pick up camp, moving away. Ayetas chuffed with laughter. The smoke swirled again and careened among the horses, carrying sparks that bit and stung. They were too small to do real harm, but the pinprick fires hurt like a cowboy's spiked rowels, and the horses threw up their heads and snorted, lashing their tails. One whinnied, its eyes rolling white. The others picked up its fear. One began to buck and lost its footing in the twisted ropes. It fell and screamed. And we'll stop there. We're good. So, thank y'all. Well, it is 3:14. AJ, your mic is muted. Joshua, can we unmute that one? And AJ, you tell us where we can find you and where your book can be purchased and what else ever you want to tell.
Whatever you, okay. You can find me. My website is ajhartley.net. And you can also find me on Facebook and Twitter and those kind of idiotic wastes of my time. And I don't use Twitter and such very much. I do use Facebook, so maybe I'll see you guys there. My books you can buy, I guess you say wherever books are sold. It seems that that's not very many places anymore. So they're on Amazon.
Yeah, that's about it. Amazon, occasionally Barnes and Noble, an indie bookstore if they happen to have a distributor, and a lot of them don't now, so that makes it very hard for them to carry new books, which is why there are so many old bookstores. Impervious is the book that AJ, there you go, is pushing at the moment, and that is his young adult fantasy. What else, AJ? Young adult fantasy, what?
Thriller, I guess. I don't know. No, I don't know. It's a book. I'm not very good at this self-promotion thing.
You and I are not good at it at all. We should have Hartley on to make sure that things are appropriately hawked. So, but everyone, I thank you all for coming. Do we have any last questions? I don't see anything.
I just want to say thank you as well for allowing me in, and for organizing this, Faith, and for your fans patiently sitting through my crap.
We do have one question, and you're welcome for introducing to a new author. Joshua, would you unmute WJR? He has a question.
Okay, when will Junkyard Cats 2 be out on Audible? Is there any timeline yet?
No. What we have right now is by the end of the year. Any other questions? You'll have to raise your hand or type it under the notes. I don't, oh, she found Impervious. Very good. Okay, no other questions? I don't see any others. AJ, thank you for being with us. Thank everybody else for coming.
Thank you.
We had like 30 people here at one point, and after 3.
Then I started reading, and then went down.
I'm sorry, what, AJ?
Nothing.
I didn't hear you.
I said we had 30 people until I started reading, and then it went down.
I think we had 30 people until 3 o'clock. I think most people just had an hour. So, but we still have 22, so we didn't lose that many.
That's right.
Yes, we're doing good. All right, guys, this is probably my last Zoom for this month, and I'm looking to do one in June with another guest, or maybe 2. So don't ask for your favorites. I will not be able to get Jim Butcher. I'm sorry. I know everyone thinks that all of us writers know each other. And while I do know Jim, do not ask him to, huh?
We do know Jim.
We do know him, but he's not going to come on my Zoom. He's doing his own thing.
Sure as hell isn't coming on mine.
Say what, AJ?
Sure as hell isn't coming on mine.
So, but if it's about someone that you particularly would like me to invite, you are welcome to send me a PM or put it under one of the invitations to this Zoom, and we'll see what we can do. I am going to have Gail Z. Martin on sometime in June, and then in July, I will be doing probably 2 of these a week, building up to and maybe starting a read along for the books, maybe from the beginning. So that's where we stand. And thank you everybody for being here. Love you all. Be safe. Wear your masks, please, and be kind.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.